Well, if it isn't my lovely FreeMelon students, thank you so much for joining me here once again on the FreeMelon Society. I'm Martyr, and what we're going to be talking about today is the natural laws. Because every once in a while you'll hear me say or make reference to natural laws or principles or natural science or whatnot, or I'll talk about this body of universal governing principles, okay? So I thought today maybe what we could do was we could just flesh out what are some of those natural principles. Probably way back in a bunch of videos, I made a reference to the 7 Hermetic principles, okay, or the 7 Hermetic laws. And you can read about that in the Hermetica itself. And the Hermetica is basically an occult school of thought, an occult school of philosophy. And in the Hermetica, they outline or have identified 7 of these very natural laws that I'm going to be sharing with you today. I'm not going to be sharing the same ones, but there are 7 of the main ones that we have to live by here in life. You can go read the Hermetica, read about the 7 Hermetic principles or laws, and that'll give you a good idea of what I'm talking about. But today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing some of the laws as directly applied to vitality. So there are thousands of laws that are in operation that we may not have just with our words identified, but we have identified many laws as they relate to the workings of the vital force, okay, within organisms. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, okay? So we're kind of expanding on some of the Hermetic laws to make it more directly applicable to life. That's what we're doing. Oh, and right before we start, I believe we're going to have to split this into 2 parts. So in part 2, we'll talk about the actual laws of life themselves. And in this first part, we're going to have to go through all of the context building and all of the necessary prolegomenon before we get into the part 2 so that we can all be on the same footing, okay? This part 1 is going to be the introduction to natural laws, and then in the next section we'll actually go and enumerate some of those laws for you, okay? So, buckle up, sit tight, turn off your cell phones, no cell phones allowed in the secret classroom, and let's get ready to talk about some natural laws. So when we talk about the laws of life, or the laws that apply to the living, what exactly do we mean by that? What exactly do we mean by law? So a law is simply a rule by which work is done. It's a rule that expresses the constant or regular order of a phenomena, or the mode of action or force of a phenomena. A law is a strict, immutable, unchangeable set of rules or rule that work is done by, or in accordance to, okay? Now, it's interesting, here in the created universe, or in the created physical world, when we talk about laws of government, we almost by default assume that if there is some sort of law that we've agreed to live by in society, by default, we recognize the existence of a lawmaker. And by the way, before I go on, rules of government, rules that authority figures place upon populations, this has nothing to do with natural law. This has nothing to do with morality. Morality and man-made laws are completely different entities. They're related, I should say. They're related, yes, of course. But the vast majority of rules that you are made to abide by, or forced, or compelled to abide by, have absolutely nothing to do with morality and are completely immoral. I'll give you an example. Being charged for parking tickets, getting violations for violating some zoning law in your community. None of these have any victims. None of them are immoral. However, the government comes after you and says that they are wrong. But you have every right in the world to do them. They're perfectly moral, perfectly correct, perfectly right. So, government laws are not laws. Right? I'm not making the equation between the two. natural law and man's law. My point, however, though, is when we encounter some of these often tyrannical, restricting rules and laws in government, we assume that there's a lawmaker who has put that into being. And it's interesting because the way that we naturally structure society tends to be in ways that reflect actual inherent laws of nature. Because that's how it works. Our thinking, our minds, these are all taken from the fabric of the universe itself. And so the intelligence that created the universe, it tends to replicate its creative tendencies in the way we express and create our world. So when we talk about these natural laws that govern reality or that govern life, as we're going to be talking about, we have to imagine that these laws did not just come about by random chance of space dust mixing together and creating for some reason an explosion and then natural laws just emerged from that. No. No. These natural laws emerged for the same reason that governmental laws emerge here on Earth, because there's a lawmaker, and so on and so forth onto higher planes of intelligence you go, where these natural laws didn't just come about. It infers the existence of a lawmaker, but of a much, much more higher and intelligent and sophisticated, lofty, divine source. Okay? So a law is a rule by which work is done. What is work? Work is any action, any change of state, any movement, or any production of any sort. In order to produce any phenomena, or in every or any instance of our physical reality, work is being performed. In all instances, right? Any change, any movement. In fact, it's often said that the only universal assurance is change itself. Everything is change. Nothing stays the same. Nothing is the same from one instant to the next. Change is the only thing that is guaranteed. And so if change is being done, then work is being performed. And in order for work to be performed, there must be a power source. There must be some sort of energy fueling change. If there's no work being done, if it's just void, well, then there is nothingness. And of course, what we see is not nothingness. So work is being done, and that is what work is. Okay? Any change of state, movement, production, whatever. So like we suggested, work, in order to be accomplished, needs a power source. Okay? All work needs a power source. All change needs a power source in order to be achieved. So we're going to talk about force for a second here. Okay? So we've got a definition of law, and we have a definition of what work is. Now, force. Think of force like the grand and vast repository of fuel or natural resource or energy, right? What powers all change or work in the entire created universe is what we can call the force. The force of... I know that sounds Star Warsy, okay, but... force, or the force of nature, or the force of the universe. You can call it the grand ether. You can call, there's all sorts of names for this that you can call it, right? You could call it vitriol. You could call it essence. You could call it whatever you like. Force is the raw, invisible, imperceptible repository of infinite power. Okay? The raw material of raw power. Okay? That's what we mean when I say force. So we have these laws, right? Laws are, again, rules by which work is done. And then we have force. Unchanneled, untapped, unrefined. So just imagine it like just infinite force. Okay. In your head, what you could think of is you could think of force being that raw material. And when that raw material is channeled through or filters through a law, a natural law, then what you get on the other side is an effect. Or, as we'll talk about later, what we get on the other side is a principle that governs reality. So, because all work requires this raw, some sort of energy source, So this energy source is the force of the universe, okay? When the force of the universe is actually given a direction and channeled into, think of like law like a filter. That's a good way to put it. Think of law like a filter for the force of creation, okay? And when the force of creation is filtered through, channeled through, worked and refined through the formula of a law, what you get on the other side is a principle that governs reality, or you get an effect. The universe is nothing but a grand illustration or a grand demonstration of that force, but channeled and made sense through the operation of law. Okay? And this is important because if we want to discover truths of reality, truths of nature, about the nature of source energy and whatnot, the thing is, we can't, because these things are so far beyond our perceptual range, so far out of reach by our conscious thinking selves, that it becomes very, very difficult. All right. What we have to do is we have to take the effects that force produces and then make inferences and make discoveries about the characteristics of force by the effects that it produces. So on the plane of effects here, we can measure and we can observe the plane of effects. And by the plane of effects, we can induce some characteristics of the higher source. So basically, we can learn about force through the effects. That's all I'm saying. Okay, sorry to make it simple. We can learn about force by learning about its effects, because we cannot learn about force directly, because that is on a far higher frequency band than our minds have the ability to tap into, at least consciously. This will make more sense when I talk about this next section. Okay, so I want to talk about force being crystallized. When we talk about force being crystallized, if I give you the mental image of a snowflake, this will make a lot more sense. Okay, it'll be easier to understand. So think of water, okay, water vapor in the atmosphere on a cold day, for example. And I'm no geologist, but, just bear with me. So you've got water vapor in the atmosphere, okay? And what happens if the water vapor rises? Well, it starts to condense, all right? Now, if it condenses enough, then what could happen is it could condense into snow. So let's assume this is wintertime, all right? I'm very familiar with wintertime. Some of you guys living in the tropics somewhere who don't really get as much snow, screw you. So in the wintertime, what you can get is this water vapor and then creating snowflakes.
Snow crystals begin with a nucleus. The nucleus is either a few molecules that come together in an ice lattice formation, or can be particles in the air such as dust. Microscopic supercooled cloud droplets then freeze around this nucleus. Once the initial droplet freezes, the snowflake begins to grow as it moves through the clouds. Single crystal snowflakes often exhibit six-sided symmetry.
Now, when snow is formed in the atmosphere and you actually measure each individual snowflake, it's very interesting that each individual snowflake represents a completely different, geometrically harmonious pattern that is distinct and individual and peculiar from all the other snowflakes that are falling, just like human beings are all different from one another. What's important to recognize here is the crystallization. So, from a loftier essence, water vapor, okay, much more airy, non-definite than a snowflake, which is crystallized and hardened, and you can see it, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can feel it, right? I guess if you're getting sexual with a snowflake, you can do that too. But the snowflake represents something more tangible, and the water vapor is less tangible. The water vapor, as it becomes more crystallized or more physicalized, in the physicalization process, it takes on characters or takes on characteristics of harmonies that are evidenced by the harmonious geometrical patterns in the snowflake, right? So it takes on laws. It takes on laws of creation. It takes on laws of harmony and mathematics, in so lowering its vibration to a physicalized place, right? You guys following me so far? Do you see what I mean? That airy vapor, it's infinite. And then when it has to condense itself and come down to the physical level, when it does that, it has no choice but to take on mathematical law, harmony, principles. And that is embodied in the geometrical pattern. That's what the geometrical pattern evidences of itself when it comes down to the plane of effects here. And so we can see it and we can measure it. All right. Think along those wavelengths, and that'll help you understand this crystallization of force that I'm trying to describe to you guys here. When force, okay, we talked about force earlier in this lecture. And you can make the analogy now between force and the water vapor in the atmosphere, yes? Okay. So, when force now, on a much grander scale than water vapor, much finer, more etheric, more divine scale, when that crystallizes and it condenses in an attempt to power a lower vibrational world, right? To come down in the scale so that it can operate in the created world. What happens when force crystallizes or condenses is that it clothes itself in law, in natural laws that govern reality, laws that we're going to be talking about in the next section, but we need to preface this with all this context first. So water vapor condenses and it crystallizes and it clothes itself in mathematical geometric harmonies, and you get a snowflake. On a grander scale, when the raw repository of divine power of force condenses, it wraps itself up and associates itself with law, with natural laws, those natural laws that we were defining earlier in this lecture. Okay? So what do you get when you have this combination of force clothed in law, right? So force, because it can't make its presence known to more lowly conscious levels, because they don't have the sophistication to be able to understand what raw force is, it needs to tailor itself in a way and make itself understandable. So what it does is it fashions laws as it condenses so as to make it discernible, understandable. Okay. Now, so we can call that something in particular. So when force and law are unified, right? When force operates through a law, what we call that on the other side is a principle. So you've heard me speak about in interviews and other videos on the channel every once in a while, principles. Okay. Natural principles. I know I've mentioned before something that helps me navigate all the pressures of a social life and eating culture and diet culture. Something that's helped me, I always tell people, just stick to your principles. So what do I mean by that? What we're talking about with principles is similar to laws. Principles are basically the phenomena that result from the commingling of force and law together. So a force and a law together give you a natural principle. And a principle basically acts as a description of reality. A principle is like a primary element or a concept or formula from which we can derive other concepts, other formulas, other ideas, right? It is what is prime, okay? Prime meaning first coming. So the principle is a truthful concept or a prime concept from which you can make all sorts of other inferences and whatnot about reality. I should give you an example here. So, because I want to be understood. Let's say you are a bumbling child, okay? And you're trying to learn how to walk and move, and you're learning how balance works. Just figuring out your legs, figuring out how much energy to put into each leg and stand, and you're just figuring out balance, okay? And then at some point, you realize, oh my God, when my center of gravity, my center of mass, when my center moves outside of the base of support, my base of support meaning my legs, anything that supports a center of weight is a base of support. The base of support could be one pillar, one leg, 2 legs, 3 legs, 4 legs, whatever. If my center of gravity shifts outside of my base of support, so center of gravity outside the base, then I lose balance, and that's when I fall. And when I'm balanced, my center of gravity has to be in between my base of support. If I kick one of my base of support away, then my center of gravity still needs to be in the center of my base, but it's harder to maintain balance because your base of support is very narrow. But as soon as the base of support is wider and your center of gravity falls in between the base of support, then you are balanced. You have now, as a human being, just learned a principle of reality. And that principle being that if I want to be balanced, my center of gravity or my center of mass has to be set firmly in between a base of support. And the second it moves away from that center, then the principle of balance has been lost. The thing is now no longer in balance. So now you can derive other principles from that principle. So, for example, let's say someone suggests to you that you should eat your own excrement for nutrition, right? You actually hear this in the health community from time to time. And you are thinking of a good way to respond. And you come to the conclusion that the best constructive and most loving way to respond would be to hip toss that person to the ground very violently, which would be a really bad decision. I wouldn't suggest responding like that. But let's say that's the decision that you make. So you could use this principle of balance to know that if I pull that person's center of gravity, center of mass away from his base of support, I know, I don't need any science to tell me this. I know absolutely that that person's balance will be completely lost. There's no contrary bit of evidence that I can be presented with that will convince me otherwise. I know that that will be the case. And so you can use this principle of balance that you've learned and you can apply it to this situation where you are now hip tossing the crap out of someone who suggested that you eat your own excrement for nutrition. Okay, we're getting close to wrapping it up for part 1 of this tiny little series. So let's recap what we learned, okay? We learned what a law was, okay? And a law is simply a rule or a formula by which work is done. And a law is immutable, unchangeable if we're talking about natural laws, natural universal laws, okay? We talked about the concept of work, okay? Well, what the hell is work? Work is any change of state, any action, any movement or production of any sort of any scale, okay? That is what work is. We also learned that in order for work to occur, a power source must fuel that work. Okay, so if work or change is happening, there must be a power source. Okay, what is that power source that creates work to be done in the universe? That is force, universal force. Force is the grand wellspring of energy that is used to power all functions of the universe. Force is used to perform any work. I don't care what kind of work we're talking about. Okay? Whether it's the work of cells dividing, whether it's a woman giving birth, whether it's a jackhammer, jackhammering the ground outside, whether it's exercising, whether it's eating, all of the forces that power all of those activities are inevitably going to be coming from the life essence itself, from universal force in some way. And we also learn about force being crystallized and wrapping itself in law so that you get the force and law combined together creates a principle. And then we gave a definition, we gave a story about what principle looked like when you discover a principle and how you can use principle to inform other decisions and other principles in life. Okay, that's going to be it for part 1. I want to keep this short and sweet so you can absorb it. And then in the next episode, we will do part 2, which is actually getting into the laws of life. Okay, that's going to be it for this part 1 of the series. And then the next time we will tackle the actual laws of life and just, kind of go through a bunch of the important ones for you. Thank you so much, guys, for sitting with me in the secret classroom on the FreeMelon Society. I really enjoyed giving you this lecture. Give this video a like, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the FreeMelon Society if you haven't subscribed already, because there are many videos like this that you'll find on the channel and many to come. Hit the bell notification if you don't want to miss anything and want to be alerted of when I do upload new videos. And that's about it for now, okay? Love you very much, guys. God bless. And we will see you next time here in the secret classroom on the FreeMelon Society. Okay? Peace and love, everyone.